So let's see how this goes in the first match, week 3 at Go Masters.
Okay, so let's have a look at the opening hands. It looks like both players can do their thing, or at least set up in the early turns. Like Corey's got the tainted indulgence that can dump Grizzlebrand. He's going to get to see what 6 or 7 fresh cards by the time he's untapping for his third turn. And then Corbin's hand is just kind of bread and butter for what the mill deck wants to do.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is something where it gets into that point that you talked about before. How much of Corbin's hand, without one of the surgical extractions already rolled up, how much is it doing to maybe even help enable Corey?
Yeah, so no surgical extraction to be found. If you were in the mill seat, Carmen, what would your kind of big picture approach be? Are you going to try to play really carefully and not leave vulnerabilities, or are you just, turn one lava spike you, so to speak, and get going?
Oh god, you had to phrase it as a lava spike. Oh god, I'm always going to cast a lava spike. I mean, not literally, but kind of literally, Like you do have to progress your game plan. There's a point where this Goryo's Vengeance deck is multi-dimensional, so I don't think Corbin can just completely take his foot off the gas. You will just lose to something like Grief plus Ephemerate shredding your hand if you think your hand is a safe place to keep all of these spells.
So Corbin, option 1 is just Ruin Crab, Polluted Delta, Mill 6. Option 2 is to play it a little slower, pass with open mana, maybe plan to utilize the cycling mode of Fractured Sanity. But yeah, Ruin Crab, let's go.
Yeah, I think it's really close. There's the Ruin Crab as well as hedging with the Fractured Sanity, like you spoke to. Drowning the Lock does just counter Goryo's Vengeance, and it's not like Corey is checked to see if the coasts are clear with a copy of Grief or Thoughtseize.
So this is going to be a really good opportunity for Corey, because if he uses Tainted Indulgence at the end of the turn, he can discard Grizzlebrand, and then, a shields down moment where from our seat we know Corbin can't counter a spell. He doesn't have surgical extraction. So no Goryos yet, but Grief is definitely one of Corey's big cards in the matchup.
And even with Touch the Spirit Realm, this is almost like extra instances of that sort of the colloquial scam thing that these
Totally.
decks can do, where they cheat out the early copy of Grief. Oh, but it looks like Prismatic Ending actually going after Ruin Crab rather than Grief trying to take apart Corbin's hand. What do you make of this?
I think I like it. It's a nice safe play, because those crabs, they're really scary. They really add up if you let them stick around on the battlefield. Plus, Corey does have to think about. I think Corbin has just straight up 4 fatal pushes in his deck. So if Corey tries to go for the Grief Blanket plan, granted he gets to look at Corbin's hand first and maybe take away a fatal push, but do you want to take away fatal push when it's one of the weaker cards in the matchup? There's a lot to think about, but in general, I think Corey's just slow and steady approach here is a totally good one.
Yeah, no, I really like your point about fatal push and Corey being a bit more careful and saying, all right, well, there isn't even that much interaction that Corbin can have. Let's make sure I play around the couple of options that are actually there.
Corey may also want to just cast Grief. I don't know how much that matters, given that the Touch the Spirit Realm is available. But if he's 1 land away from it, so it's not nothing.
Sure. All right, it looks like Corbin's just actually cycling Visions from Beyond here rather than going for the high score on it, really prioritizing finding that copy of any copies of Surgical Extraction. Do you think that this is maybe a sign of weakness that Corey could sniff out?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are a lot of circumstances where Corbin would want to wait and get full value out of the Visions. Funny, it could actually be a sign of weakness or a sign of strength. where it's like if Corbin, knows he has great plays lined up to use his mana for the next couple of turns, then maybe he wants to cycle. But in general, I agree with you that I would be thinking, okay, Corbin's looking for something, either a land drop or the surgical extraction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And here's Corey casting Grief the hard way and drowning the lock, going ahead and trading for it, which is just the old use the counter spell and the discard spell so they don't get any more information. And surgical off the top, just like Corbin wanted.
Yeah, perfect for Corbin. So he can now tap out in relative safety. Play the Jace for full price. Still have surgical so that Corey can't combo off with Goryo's Vengeance. And then there's really nothing else that can threaten the Jace. Corey's deck is not that good at killing a 4 mana value Planeswalker if he starts the turn with nothing on the battlefield.
Yeah, this is fairly problematic. I'm having a little bit of a hard time wrapping my head around if I just want to roll up Jace, maybe prepare to go for the big fireball version of Mill, or maybe try and draw some more cards by using the card draw Ancestral Visions mode.
Yeah, I guess that's a great question. Is what to actually do with Jace if you do cast it?
Oh wow! Hold on, wait. Let's check the basic land count really quick. Okay, no, there are basics in Corey's deck. I started to say is Field of Ruin just maybe starting to be strip mine, but not quite. We see Corbin pass, bunch of mana up, couple Fractured Sanities for card draw in hand. Dimir really being the only thing off this Philogy arc for Corey. And the holding pattern, I think, favors Corbin, right? Corey is more or less the aggro here.
I think that's right. At a certain point, the library size can get small enough that Corey might not even win if he's able to resolve Goryo's Vengeance. And yeah, the mill deck just has this sort of inexorable, like, I'm going to get you eventually sort of dynamic.
Right, it's a
There's also
weird you lose
Doc
one life
Isle.
a turn.
Yeah. 1 life per turn, just by default.
Yeah. All right, Field of Ruin going after Corey's untapped Watery Grave. And I see Swamp in the graveyard, so it can't be replaced with another black source, but I kind of think that Corbin's just trying to get cards out of Corey's deck the free way. Oh, this is interesting. So Corey's going to go ahead and channel Touch the Spirit Realm on Philogy Archaeologist. Oh, Corbin's responding with Surgical Extraction, it looks like.
What's he going to go after?
Oh, wow. What if he goes after Goryo's Vengeance?
Yeah, I guess that's just as good. You could wait and try to counter the Goryo's Vengeance with surgical, or you could just take them all out of your opponent's library and not have to worry about it in the first place.
Yeah, wow. Now that there's this shields down moment that Corbin's kind of created with this Field of Ruin, right? This just wow. Does Corey's deck do anything anymore? We always talked about hitting the reanimation targets, but this looks fairly potent to me.
If you ask me, once Corey loses his Goryo's Vengeance, it's really going to be all about grief. Like he's got to have a good hit with grief, ephemery, shred your hand, start attacking for 3.
I wonder if he leaves Goryo's Vengeance in the graveyard. Okay, no, goes ahead and exiles it. Just for the counts on stuff like Visions from Beyond and Jace.
Good thought.
Finally resolving that Field of Ruin. Okay, other hand, I'm looking at Corey's deck, and there is a Hedge Maze. So it is possible to just cast Atraxa.
Nice. Okay.
Well, another surgical off the top. Maybe Corbin will actually take every threat out of Corey's deck.
I think Corbin, has something pretty close to checkmate in the course of 2 turns here. Fractured Sanity is 14, and Jace for 4 mana is 15. Corey's got currently 27 cards in library. I don't think the Goryo's Vengeance deck is capable of winning all at once. So the only way Corey could stop this before sideboarding is just finding Grief to take one of those cards away from Corbin.
Sure. Oh, it looks like this Field of Ruin might have been a misstep, because otherwise it could be Fractured Sanity into the card under Shelldock Isle, which I don't believe we know. But I don't think it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, something that these players are going to be thinking about as we get into these mid and late game stages is, you could just look through your opponent's graveyard and use some of the information you gather to, to help decide what they might have in their hand or what you have to worry about for the remainder of the game. As you mentioned, the graveyard counts, the library count for purposes of Shelldock Isle, these things all matter. So, from our viewer perspective, you might see a turn where it's like, oh, this looks pretty obvious and straightforward, but there's still going to be moments where the players choose to take their time.
Oh, and this is interesting. So Ephemerate and Philology Archaeologist here has me wondering, what is Corey digging for?
I think Corey's really desperate to. Oh yeah, well, there's no Goryo's Vengeances anymore, so I don't even. Yeah, it's a great question. You can't find Grief off the Archaeologist, so Corey's. I mean, I'm a Corey fan, but I'm feeling pretty discouraged from his perspective in this particular game.
Yeah, this is a spot where he might just be going through the motions of, all right, well, I'm only 1% from here, but I want to get every percentage point. He is the returning champion, right? He did end up winning the last season of the Masters series that we did.
Indeed.
So it's hard to not feel for him a bit here. This is a tough first match.
This might be one of the cards he was looking for. Tainted Indulgence, just to dig a little deeper. Let's find that Grief. But as far as I can tell, he can't remove the Jace, and the Jace is just a lethal with a -5 activation next turn.
Oh, yeah, you're totally correct.
That Jace Perfected Mind is a cool card. I've seen that one show up in Standard a bit. Just for, it's great at getting the game over with in matchups where otherwise the games wouldn't be able to end. These Atraxa Mirrors, Domain Ramp, Slogurk, the Overslime, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a really big fan of that one. Not to do the whole Obama giving self medal too hard on that one, but I ended up doing a lot of work on this card on the All Will Be One team. And
Oh, I'm glad
really,
to hear that.
really like how it
actually
turned out.
hoping I would set you up for something like that. Like,
No, we're on the same level. I appreciate it. That was a nice alley-oop. All right, and Corey just ephemerating Philology Archaeologist. This feels like the concession.
okay, Prismatic Ending. That's a tough way to do it against Jace.
All right, there it is. Game 1 going to Corbin, which this is a matchup that we kind of knew would be pretty bad, at least game 1. But is there anything that you think really changes going into game 2? Like, our game plan's going to be different? It looks like even on Corbin's side, there's somehow more stuff you could want in this matchup. Maybe.
Yeah, so it gets somehow even worse for the Goryo's Vengeance plan. So I think Corey's going to be racking his brain for like, what other approach can I take for the matchup? He's going to probably try to lean really heavily on Grief. He does get to bring in a couple of Force of Negations. So it's going to be a little bit of a shift for him, and then Corbin basically just decides like how much do I need to feel really safe against Goryo's Vengeance. I think he has access to, I counted like 11 anti-graveyard cards. Might feel content with just 3 surgical and 3 extirpate. But we'll see what he chooses to do.
Yeah, there's so many things that could be brought in, and at the end of the day, you do really only want 60 cards. We see Tasha's Hideous Laughter immediately hit the sideboard, which makes sense. It will probably exile like 4 cards on average.
Yeah.
All right, Fatal Pushes hitting the sidelines makes sense, especially after we saw Corey play around it pretty well in game 1. That card's never doing anything.
There's some guessing game related to the crabs where if Corbin is really happy with his sideboard options and he looks at Corey's deck and says, well, Corey's going to have to leave in his Fatal Push and Prismatic Ending anyway, then maybe Corbin could think about, trying to do a juke kind of move and take out some of his creatures. But, plan A works here. So I don't think there's any need for Corbin to do anything unintuitive or wild.
Yeah, and you can see at this point he's basically just seasoning his interaction to taste, right? We see a Mystical Dispute come in. We see him kind of mousing over some of the other 1-drops that he can play over the other Mystical Dispute. There is so much redundancy for this sort of matchup. I mean, Corey won the entire last season, right? So if there's anyone who can overcome this sort of thing, it's in his range. I'm really excited to see how game 2 plays out, to see if it's possible.
I enjoy watching somebody learn a new matchup on the fly, and in particular, what kind of mulligan strategy Corey is going to employ. Like from my seat, he has just kind of a normal hand. This hand is neither really good nor really bad. You probably keep under most circumstances, just hoping that Faithful Mending will deliver something, and that is what he chooses to do.
Yeah, and with cards like Faithful Mending and Tainted Indulgence in your deck, you're encouraged to keep a wider range of hands just to have raw cardboard. With, especially on Corbin's side, where it looks a bit slower, just a couple cantrips, Archive Trap, and 1 Mystical Dispute. Oh, that's a lot of interaction on Corbin's side. Do you prefer more interaction or less if you're on the mill side?
Well, I was thinking about it. Mystical Dispute and Spell Pierce on paper are good cards against a blue colored combo deck. On the other hand, it's like, boy, Corey's cards just aren't very good. Do I even care about countering these?
Wow, don't hold back on his account. You should know. Yeah, I mean, there's also a point where, like last game, we saw a bunch of land drops get hit, and those Spell Pierce Mystical Dispute cards do fall off over time. So I'm a little worried about them when Grief might just be Corey's go-to game plan.
Good point.
All right.
It is
so here's some more
hypothetically possible that Corey could have an opening here. Okay, Corbin found an untapped blue source, so he's got 1 counter available.
Yeah, and I think I like going shields down for the preordain there. You can't just not cast your spells forever, and it's pretty clear that this is your turns are going to ask you to have multiple blue this game.
Agreed.
Faithful Mending just finding a couple of lands for Corey, which is pretty awkward. This is almost like the Fable situation, or Fable of the Mirror Breaker, where you want to discard an extra land or 2, but then you just find a couple of more. All right, Gristlebrand hit the graveyard, exposed to graveyard hate now.
Wow. Okay, we've got a game.
Okay, so we have Goryo's Vengeance off the top. Oh, wow. This, all of a sudden, now there's a game of cat and mouse, right? Where we have all the information. So it's easy for us to say, don't jam, do jam, etc. But both of these players just see an opponent with 6, 7 cards in hand. How do you kind of feel out what's going on whenever you end up in these spots?
Great question. The most important thing to ask yourself is it going to get better for me? So, for example, if Corbin has extirpate, spell pierce, whatever it might be, is there any world where waiting results in getting a better shot at it? And in the case of like mystical dispute, the answer could easily be yes. In the case of surgical extraction or extirpate, it's more ambiguous, you know.
Oh my god, look at this instant Misty Crack.
Yeah.
Oh my god, sorry to cut you off. This is so huge. This is fields down.
Love it. So now Corey's only worried about surgical extraction. He's probably really happy in particular that extirpate was not available to Corbin in that spot.
Oh my god, this is so huge that Corbin did just go ahead and do that. See Rainforest Crack. Oh my gosh.
So now the shoe's on the other foot, where we're talking about in game one, Corey's inability to pressure Jace. Corbin cannot really damage Corey at all. So if Corey wants to draw 14 cards, there's not really a lot he has to worry about.
And even more disastrous, it looks like this happened in Corey's second main phase. So if Corey draws a bunch of cards, he could have griefed, but it looks like he's going to play it a bit more patiently and say, no, I actually want to untap with a bunch of cards in my hand instead.
Oh, good noticing that. I wonder why it ended up happening in Corey's main phase. Maybe just the way Corbin has his stops set on MTGO.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's a spot where it might have been a mistake, right? But I think you kind of get in the rhythm of going, all right, instep, I cracked my fetch land, and so on. So you say, no, let's get through it. We're on MagicOnline. I want to make this happen. But those are the sort of punishes that can happen when you get a little too comfortable in that rhythm.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things where you think like, oh, how could this possibly matter? That I'm fetching at the end of the turn versus on my own main phase, whatever it might be. But in reality, Magic is such a punishing game that it only has to matter once every 100 or every 1,000 games before it's like, oh man, I don't want to make that mistake again.
Right, exactly. This is a spot where Corbin's kicking himself over that. It's not like 1 or 2 life usually matters that much. Just shocking for the Watery Grave could be fine. And we see Griselbrand hit Corbin, then 7 more cards hit Corey's hand. Actually
there's
pretty anemic grip.
Yeah, it's true. Corey has a lot of cards that are not particularly helpful in this situation. Just wanted to shout out a great point in chat that Corbin actually may have done it intentionally in the second main phase so that a creature that was Goryo's Vengeance wouldn't have stuck around until the following turn.
It's entirely possible. A bit harder to believe with Spell Pierce in hand for me, but I can see the merit of that. And Dispute trading for Time Raveler. It's like Corey weighing, do I want to delete 7 more cards out of my deck? And this is the sort of that push and pull that we talked about going into the match, right? Where normally your life total is the part that matters. But right now, I feel like Corey probably feels pretty in control of the clock of this game and just doesn't want to chuck it.
Yeah. How much do you think Corey has Archive Trap on his mind? Is he going to try to play the whole game without using a fetch land?
I'm starting to think so. And you see even more life get paid by Griselbrand. 2 griefs drawn this time. That is huge. First one hits the stack. What are the cards you're looking at and trying to play around? Like, how does Corey lose from here?
Well, so Corey needs 2 more attacks, or not, or the game's over. But yeah, it's a great question. I mean, Corey has so many cards and resources available to him there that he wants to just take it slow and navigate carefully and not walk into any traps like the aforementioned archive trap. But yeah, realistically, he just needed to make sure Corbin couldn't actually kill him before the Grizzlebrand was able to attack 2 more times.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess that last game does speak to the ways that it is possible for this Goryo's deck to be able to pull it out. There was a point where I really feel like we saw Corey tax Corbin's mana there. Just Corbin had to spin his wheels a little bit too much, had that shields down moment, and this deck, you alluded to it before, is so punishing and so good at capitalizing on those small squeezes.
It's so big that Goryo's Vengeance is an instant rather than a sorcery. It really, really improves your ability to play around counter spells and just navigate the game in the direction you want it to go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we see both players kind of change maybe 1, 2 cards, but I think Corey didn't change that much. And a lot of Corbin's decisions were more in the play draw distinction space. Ooh, Soul Guide Lantern Visions and Beyond. I hadn't considered that combo before. That can be a bit tough. And Corey has the turn 1 Grief if he wants it, and a bunch of 2 mana draw spells.
Yeah, for sure. Corey's missing Ephemerate to make this hand absolutely perfect, but I think he's happy to keep anything functional with Grief, as Grief is probably his best card in the matchup.
And are you inclined to play the Grief on 1 here? I know you are a disciplined Thoughtseize veteran. We see Corey not go for it. Can you talk us through why he'd hold it instead of just shoving here?
It's a similar answer to the question that you asked me in the previous game, which is you ask yourself, is this going to get better, worse? Is there something, more valuable I can do with my card later? And the first question is there any particular card that you want to hit from Corbin's side? The mill deck is pretty redundant, so it's not like there's one key card or turn where you need to make sure you take their card out of their hand before turn 2 or turn 3. But more importantly, Corey is playing a combo deck where he could set up Goryo's Vengeance and then want to use the Grief to clear the way for that. Or B, he could pick up Ephemerate or Touch the Spirit Realm, in which case the Grief skyrockets in value and actually starts to represent a plan all on its own.
Sure. Yeah. All of that makes a lot of sense. And we see this prismatic ending immediately going after the crab that Corbin presented, which speaks to what you were talking about in the first game of how those can really add up over time. Corbin building a little nest egg of mill spells here, but a bit light on interaction. Happy to pick up Drown in the Lock off the top.
Corey has walked into the trap.
Oh, this is so nice. You get to see how the surveil goes. And then, I mean, you archive trap either way, I suspect, but especially when you can see Corey thinking about the surveil, if you're in person, you just have to be like, okay, don't say anything. Don't say it.
Ooh, Corbin elected to not
Okay.
use Archive Trap. Now, one possible reason is he has Field of Ruin to force the trap through at a different time. So if he doesn't want to open up the door to Goryo's Vengeance or doesn't want to put himself in a spot where he has to use Soul Guide Lantern, this is a sensible play. Definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, and there's even, it may just be that he really wants to try and stay in position with this Soul Guide Lantern and doesn't want to give Corey an opportunity to say, play an interaction spell on Soul Guide Lantern, then Corbin cracks the lantern, then Corey responds and Goryo's Vengeances or something to that effect. All right, Field of Ruin going after Corey's 1 white source. This may be forcing that archive trap like we talked about before. Corey trying to figure out if he wants to cast the draw spell now in response or after the search. Oh, interesting. So he's floating a blue off the Meticulous Archive because it's likely that he's just going to fetch a plane, so he isn't knocked off of white anyway, which communicates that he's probably casting Faithful Mending here.
Yeah, I wonder what he wants to do with Tainted Indulgence, if he would prefer to wait until he has a full graveyard and just use that as a Night's Whisper.
Right. There's a point where if you're thinking you're going to end up on the grief plan, you do actually just want a higher quantity of cards and resources.
So Corbin, no interest in waiting on Visions of Beyond, maybe because he thinks it's going to be too hard to set up with Soul Guide Lantern anyway.
Yeah, pretty interesting. All right, does find that Ephemerate to pair with Grief next turn. So even if there isn't a reanimation plan happening at this point, key difference in this version of the quote unquote scam lines, as opposed to the ones that we've seen out of the red black decks, is that Grief never hits the graveyard. So this Soul Guide Lantern isn't going to be able to stop Ephemerate from pairing with Grief to shred Corbin's hand if all of those spells resolve.
Yep. A play we saw in a previous game was Corbin countering Grief with Drown in the Lock.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if that comes up again. But yeah, I agree with you that this is really exactly what Corey wants to accomplish is Grief plus Ephemerate.
All right, and here's the archive trap from Corbin. I feel like this is kind of the turning point of the game where Corbin's saying, "All right, I gotta go. I gotta get this game over with. Got to make this happen." Oh, this is interesting. So we're seeing Corey thinking about firing off Tainted Indulgence with the stacked graveyard to draw to. Is that to bait the Soul Guide Lantern, or just trying to get in while the getting's good?
Good question. Yeah, there's a lot to think about here for Corey. It's like navigating through the Soul Guide Lantern, keeping a black card in your hand in case you want to evoke Grief, managing your library size, managing your hand size, using your mana effectively. So it's a very not obvious play in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really tough when you saw the counter magic from Corbin as well. Getting a draw two out while Corbin's tapped out has to be at least a little attractive. All right,
Also,
second.
not obvious from Corbin's perspective here. You could take the shot to just, fractured sanity for 14 more cards. Or he could pass with Drown in the Lock. He could choose to cycle the fractured sanity. He could choose to deploy the Hedron Crab despite having no land drop. We'll see.
Yeah, this is all so interesting because there's a point where the Soul Guide Lantern could even be cycled if Corbin thinks that he can actually just kill Corey through a copy of something like Atraxa or Gristlebrand. Modern's so sick. Sorry. All the ways these different cards play. And, Corey's draw two hit a couple lands, and then he hit that Hedge Maze, which can theoretically cast the Atraxa, but probably not what the Doctor ordered this second.
So talking through the options, Corey could use Goryo's Vengeance, which the best outcome he can hope for is forcing Corbin's hand on Soul Guide Lantern. Not that attractive. He could spend 4 mana for Grief. He could evoke Grief and ephemerate it. He could turn to the flashback of Faithful Mending to help dig a little bit deeper in his library. Now, if Corey knew or suspected that Corbin had double Drown in the Lock in his hand, he might actually be a bit more excited about the force you to use Soul Guide Lantern type of path.
Mm. Yeah, this is really tough. Corbin having double interaction spell here is just. I feel like if you're in Corey's seat, it's so hard to put Corey on or Corbin on that rather. I mean, I guess it's possible, but you know yet that Corbin hasn't been hitting land drops on any of these crabs. And Corbin, because he has this Soul Guide Lantern, wants to fire off Drown in the Lock at basically anything. Okay, so land fetch from Corey. Hallowed Fountain. Guess this means grief is what's happening, which is
Yeah, tap 4 lands
perfect.
for grief is perfectly reasonable play. It's not going to work out that well for Corey in this case, but can't really blame him for going for it.
Yeah, I imagine Corbin's just fist pumping every time he thinks that he's going to get Corey to tap out. Oh, this is a flashback of Faithful Mending. Okay. Okay, I dig this.
Oh no, Corey drew Fatal Push, but tapped his land so that he doesn't have it available.
Ooh, yeah. Well, okay, but now he can Grief Ephemerate? Maybe this is what he was playing to here? Looks like Godless Shrine's in the graveyard, so maybe he had gone to even fetch Godless Shrine. Whoa. Grief exiling the Goryo's Vengeance, just leaving himself with Ephemerate Fatal Push. Corey is all in on this Grief plan. But Drown in the Lock gets its man. Incarnation.
Okay, this is going to be a hard hit.
Yeah, fetch land. Huge draw for Corbin.
Honestly, like, bill you for 20 cards, leave you with 7 left, and just wish Corey good luck. That's a fine plan. The Goryo's Vengeance deck is not that great at killing with such a small library. You know, Atraxa and Grizzlebrand are weakened even in the best case scenario when you have no library to work with.
Goryo's Vengeance off the top. Maybe this is how it happens from Corey's side. Corbin did not cast Fractured Sanity. Playing this game very cautiously after last game. With that big punish that let game 2 get away, Corbin does not want to let this one slip from between his fingers. Oh yeah, this is just a cycle of Fractured Sanity.
Yeah, you can justify that by saying, okay, what's the worst case scenario? I draw a land, and then that represents 3 or 6 more points of mill anyway.
Totally. All right, Fatal Push on Crab in response. Corbin lets it go. And Corey's going to use that opportunity to go ahead and Faithful Mending. Hits Grief and Prismatic Ending. Prismatic Ending, the type of thing that we talked about before that can put Corey in position to actually resolve Goryo's Vengeance here.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Corey actually has a pretty strong selection of cards to work with here. So because of Goryo's Vengeance being an instant, you could see a world where you point Prismatic Ending at the Soul Guide Lantern, Corbin responds, respond again, and cast the Goryo's Vengeance.
All right, Swamp. Easy card to hit the bin. Corey feeling out, do I care more about Grief plus Ephemerate, or do I care more about Vengeance Ending? Given Corbin only has one card, I somewhat suspect Ephemerate will go, but maybe it's Grief if you want to use Ephemerate to keep around your Goryo's Vengeance creature.
Yeah,
God, this is
point.
so complicated.
Well, I like this from Corey because if he draws a black card to evoke the grief, he can actually fight through both the Soul Guide Lantern and the Drown all at once.
All right, well, here's another crab in a polluted delta. That is a lot of cards.
Boy, I wonder if Corey even has enough to win with. Imagine he gets to Goryo's Vengeance
Wow.
Atraxa, he sees the rest of his library, but who knows if that would even be enough. If he has Ephemerate or Touch the Spirit Realm, it might be.
All right, yeah, Otawara hitting the bin off the Surveil. So Corbin doesn't have it rolled up, but does have a really nice bit of insulation. Or are you really wanting an untapped land? Maybe not. A black card. I believe black card is the answer. Touch the Spirit Realm. Not quite it. But it looks like it's go time. Prismatic Ending. Corey figuring out what to target.
So for those watching, the key to this play is Goryo's Vengeance being an instant rather than a sorcery. So Gory is basically just forcing the action on Soul Guide Lantern, and his goal is to respond to the activation with Goryo's Vengeance. There's a lot of other dynamics at play in this game. You might think, well, why doesn't Corey grief first and wait till next turn? There's a huge sense of urgency because it's kind of now or never. He's going to either die or risk just not having enough cards left in his library to win with.
And now Corbin's trying to weigh, do I use Drown in the Lock on this Prismatic Ending? Do I let Prismatic Ending just hit this Soul Guide Lantern or crack it in response to try and force the Goryo's Vengeance? I assume the line is not let the creature come back and drown in the lock to kill the creature, but that wouldn't be the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's true.
A little oh, not a misclick on mana. That mana's fine. Goryo's Vengeance choosing a target. No drown in the lock's gonna get it.
Okay, so Corbin wins this battle, and almost anything in his deck is a really powerful draw here, with Hedron Crab on the battlefield and Corey with 7 cards in library.
You can see Corbin trying to figure out, is letting the creature hit the battlefield even a bad thing? Because it's theoretically going to draw a bunch, whatever it is. Maybe the thinking is if it's Atraxa and takes, 3 or 4 cards out of deck, that means a land off the top is lethal with Hedron Crab.
Yeah, Corbin might be doing a quick check to see if all of the Ephemerates and Touch the Spirit Realms are gone. In our case, we see Touch the Spirit Realm, so it could potentially be quite bad for Corbin if he gambles on letting the Vengeance resolve.
Yeah, this is one of those spots where people talk about something like fancy play syndrome as like, oh, do I not do the level 1 thing because this is the one time it's correct? And for these sorts of stakes, like the prestige of being able to do well in something like MTGO Masters, I certainly respect making sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed.
Oh yeah, no doubt. You don't want, this is going to be the most important turn of the game one way or another, so there's really no reason to rush it.
Right. This is the spot where you just want to make sure that you aren't laying awake at night. Oh God, why didn't I just drown in the lock that Goryo's Vengeance? Or why didn't I just let them take 3 more cards out of their deck? 4 more cards out of their deck. Come on.
Question in chat: Is it legal to just not take cards off of the Atraxa?
I think it depends on how Atraxa's worded. All right, it looks like Atraxa's hitting the battlefield, and now Corbin's going to go ahead and destroy it with that Drown in the Luck. All right, saying, all right, great, if you answer my Hedron Crab, that's fine, but I just want you to take cards out of your deck.
Well, this is what needed to happen for Corey to be in the game. He's going to have at least a 7/7 creature now. Corbin gets another turn, so there's plenty of things Corbin can draw where he still wins. But this is now, we went from a game that was largely decided in Corbin's favor to now there are a few outcomes possible.
Yeah, I mean, you have to hand it to him. This is the much more exciting play, right? It's so sweet. There's so much tension in what's going on right now. And there's even a point where, okay, so we're seeing all 7 cards that are left in Corey's deck. That is Flooded Strand, Goryo's Vengeance, Grief, Polluted Delta, Prismatic Ending, Teferi, Time Raveler, and Thoughtseize. I think you just, oh, maybe you can't leave them, and you do actually have to take as many types as you can?
I checked the fine print, and Atraxa says for each card type you may put a card of that type.
Yeah.
So
okay, great.
You can choose nothing, but Corey looks like really wanted to get an answer to the Hedron Crab. So the plan is give Corbin exactly 1 draw step, but not 2.
Yeah, so it just feels like the plan he found is Corbin draws 2 lands in a row, is the line.
Wow, this is exciting.
Oh, Shelldock Isle! Okay, there's the first land. Corey might not have made a specific enough wish. Wow, what a game.
So Corey goes down to 3 cards, and now Corbin basically just has to find a mill card in his top 5, 4 with the Shelldock Isle, 1 with his draw step. But I have a question for you, Carmen, and if you know the answer. Does Teferi Time Raveler stop a Shelldock Isle?
It does, but not from the graveyard.
Oh, it got milled.
That was one of the cards that got milled. This is preposterous. All right, hard cast Grief. Probably an attack for 7 from Atraxa, and a couple cross fingers from Corey.
He's got to dodge a lot of bullets here.
All right, let's see it. Drum roll. Swamp.
That's 1 bullet dodged.
Shelldock Isle tapped. Visions from Beyond. Surgical Extraction. It goes to Corey in 3 games. That is Corey Baumeister taking out every single percentage point possible. He was going to win with 1 card in deck against Mill.